I just want to say that I am not, and never have been, in full agreement with everything that PETA has brought about.
Bea Arthur made a career out of saying exactly what she thought. As Maude Findlay and later as Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls, she was the woman with the sharpest line in the room, the one who never seemed to hide a single thing. But for over 50 years, Bea Arthur was quietly carrying a version of her life that almost nobody knew about. Not her fans, not most of her co-stars, and for a long time, not even the government records meant to keep track of her. What she hid and why she hid it is a story that changes everything you thought you knew about her. The Marine no one knew about. Before she was Bea Arthur, she was Bernice Frankel, born on May 13, 1922, in New York City to Jewish immigrant parents from Poland and Austria. When she was 11, the family relocated to Cambridge, Maryland, where her parents opened a small women's clothing store. She was a big personality even then, known in school for her sharp tongue and quick comebacks, the kind of kid who got voted wittiest in her class before she ever set foot on a stage. Her family worried about her health during her teenage years, so they sent her to Linden Hall, an all-girls boarding school in Lititz, Pennsylvania, and afterward, she spent a year at Blackstone College for Girls in Virginia, still with no clear plan for what came next. Then the world changed. In February 1943, with the country deep into World War II and desperate for help on the home front, she learned that the Marine Corps was finally opening its ranks to women for the very first time. She didn't hesitate. She wrote in her enlistment paperwork that she had been scheduled to start a different job the very next day, but decided joining up was simply the only thing worth doing. Before that, she had already been volunteering as an air raid warden and working as a food analyst, testing samples for mold and bacteria, so signing up for something bigger clearly wasn't out of character for her. That decision made her one of the first women ever accepted into the United States Marine Corps Women's Reserve, a branch of the military that had never before let women through its doors. She went through basic training at Hunter College in New York, then moved on to the Motor Transport School at Camp Lejeune, and eventually landed at Cherry Point, North Carolina, where she worked as a truck driver and dispatcher. Records held by the National World War II Museum show just how new and improvised the whole program still was at the time, with the Marine Corps issuing her paperwork on borrowed Navy forms because their own hadn't even been printed yet. By the time she was honorably discharged in September 1945, she had risen all the way to the rank of Staff Sergeant, a real accomplishment for a woman serving in a branch that barely knew what to do with its first female recruits. Here's where it gets strange. Bea Arthur spent the rest of her life almost completely denying this ever happened. In a 2001 interview, she flatly said she was never in the military at all, a claim that a detailed later confirmed was simply untrue, since her service was very real and lasted 31 months. She had even completed a 4-week course as a motor mechanic while stationed at Camp Lejeune, on top of her regular duties as a dispatcher. Her own son later admitted that she barely spoke about her service, other than the occasional comment that she could drive just about any vehicle you put her behind the wheel of. It wasn't until 2010, a full year after her death, that her enlistment records became public knowledge, and the truth of her service finally came out into the open for good. Nobody knows for certain why she buried it so deep. Some who have studied her file over the years have floated a few theories. Maybe she didn't see herself as a real veteran in an era when the word almost never applied to women. Or maybe her outspoken support for progressive causes later in life made her want distance from the military establishment. Whatever the reason, one of the most talkative women in Hollywood chose total silence on this one chapter, and it took government paperwork to break it open decades later. It's worth sitting with how unusual this really is. Most people who serve during a war especially in a moment as historic as the founding of the first women's branch of the Marine Corps, tend to talk about it for the rest of their lives. Bea Arthur did the opposite, building an entire public persona around bluntness while quietly pretending an entire chapter of her own life simply never existed. Even close friends who thought they knew her history inside and out had no idea a military file was sitting somewhere with her name on it. Bea Arthur was already learning, at 20 years old, how to hold two truths at once. The truck-driving Marine and the future Broadway star were the same person, but for decades, the public only ever got to meet one of them. And as it turns out, that instinct to keep a whole chapter of her life locked away didn't stop with the war. Stay with me, because her next secret was even closer to home, and it's the reason we know her by the name we do at all. A marriage she rarely mentioned. When people think about Bea Arthur's personal life, they usually think of one marriage, the one that lasted nearly 3 decades and produced the 2 sons she raised. But before any of that, there was a first husband almost nobody talks about. His name was Robert Allen Arthur, which lists the marriage as beginning in 1944 and ending in divorce by 1947, right around the same years she was finishing up her military service. Robert was a fellow Marine, and he went on to become a respected screenwriter, later regarded as one of Hollywood's leading dramatists of that era, working across television, film, and Broadway over the following decades. The two of them met during their service years and built a short-lived life together as the war wound down. Multiple retrospectives on her early years suggest that health complications discovered not long into the marriage, along with the general strain of 2 young people trying to launch careers at the same time, helped push the couple apart faster than either of them expected. Whatever the exact cause, the marriage was brief, and Bernice Frankel walked away from it having kept just one thing: the surname. She dropped Bernice for good, adjusted the spelling slightly, and stepped into the world as Bea Arthur, a name she reportedly chose because she thought it simply looked better lit up on a marquee. Think about that for a moment. The name millions of people around the world would come to know, the name printed on Emmy nominations and Broadway playbills for the next 5 decades, came out of a marriage that barely survived 3 years and that she almost never spoke about again in any meaningful way. It's a small detail with a big impact, because it means one of the most recognizable names in American television history was essentially a leftover souvenir from a chapter of her life she chose to close the door on. She didn't build a mythology around this marriage. She didn't bring it up in interviews, and she certainly never leaned on it for sympathy or attention. She just moved forward, enrolling at the New School in New York to study under the direction of the famed dramatic workshop instructor Erwin Piscator, sharpening the stage skills that would define the next several decades of her life and career. By 1950, she had met director and actor Gene Saks while working in that same New York theater scene, and the two married that same year. Their partnership lasted 28 years, and Gene Saks's own recorded biography confirms that the couple adopted 2 sons together, Matthew and Daniel, while both of their careers kept climbing side by side. Matthew would eventually follow his mother into acting, while Daniel built a career as a set designer. Gene would go on to direct Bea in the original Broadway production of Mame, even though the lead role famously went to Angela Lansbury instead of Bea herself. She took the supporting role of Vera Charles and won a Tony Award for it in 1966 anyway, proof that she could turn a disappointment into one of her signature triumphs. She reprised that same role for the 1974 film version opposite Lucille Ball, cementing her reputation as one of the sharpest comedic voices working in theater and film at the time. The marriage to Saks ended quietly in 1978, and Bea never married again. She spent the rest of her life without another public partner, choosing instead to pour her focus into a stage and television career. The star who guarded her heart. Bea Arthur built 2 of the most beloved characters in television history by playing women who said whatever was on their mind, no filter, no apology. She first introduced audiences to Maude Findlay as a guest character on All in the Family, a loud and liberal cousin who gave bigoted Archie Bunker a real run for his money. The character was such a hit that producer Norman Lear built an entire spin-off around her, and Maude premiered on CBS in September 1972. The show tackled subjects that almost no other sitcom dared to touch at the time, including alcoholism and a storyline about abortion that drew a wave of viewer backlash. Bea won an Emmy for the role in 1977, proving that audiences wanted exactly the kind of bold, unfiltered storytelling she was bringing to their screens week after week. Years later, she stepped into the role that would define her for a whole new generation, Dorothy Zbornak, on The Golden Girls, which ran from 1985 to 1992 and turned Bea, Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty into a genuine cultural phenomenon. Dorothy delivered some of the most quoted comebacks of the decade, and the role earned Bea a second Emmy Award. In 2008, not long before her death, she was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame, a recognition of a career spanning more than 5 decades. And yet, the actress behind both of these iconic characters was famously guarded about her actual private feelings. Friends and biographers have long described Bea as someone who struggled with insecurity about her height and her deep voice, both of which made her stand out in an industry obsessed with a very narrow idea of what a leading lady should look and sound like. She turned those very features into her greatest professional weapons, but she rarely spoke publicly about how much genuine work it took to get comfortable in her own skin. She also carried real personal loss quietly. Her Golden Girls co-star Estelle Getty passed away in 2008, just a year before Bea herself died, and those close to her said she felt that loss deeply, even as she kept working and touring right up until the end. Bea Arthur toured the country with a one-woman show called And Then There's Bea in 2001, and returned to Broadway in 2002 with Bea Arthur on Broadway, Just Between Friends, which earned her a Tony nomination for Special Theatrical Event. She was already in her late 70s at that point, still performing, still making audiences laugh, all while keeping her private grief mostly to herself and out of the press entirely. Outside of acting, Bea was known as a passionate animal rights activist, and after her death, her family asked that donations be made in her honor to either the Art Attack Foundation or PETA rather than sending flowers. She left behind an estimated net worth of around $8 million, a reflection of decades spent working steadily across stage, film, and television without ever chasing tabloid attention the way so many of her peers did during and after their most famous roles. What almost nobody knew during this stretch of her life was just how involved she had quietly become in a cause far outside the entertainment world. Bea Arthur had spent years as one of Hollywood's earliest and most consistent supporters of gay rights, opening her home to gay fans decades before it was safe or fashionable to do so, and using her celebrity to raise money for causes that most stars of her generation avoided entirely. She rarely made a big public show of it. She simply showed up, wrote checks, performed at benefits, and used her platform quietly whenever it actually mattered most. That quiet advocacy would eventually turn into the biggest secret of all, one that the public wouldn't fully understand until after she was already gone. Because Bea Arthur wasn't just supporting a cause behind the scenes, she was planning something that nobody, not even her most devoted fans, would learn about until it was too late to thank her for it in person. The secret she took to her grave. Bea Arthur died on April 25, 2009, at her home in Los Angeles, surrounded by her family. Her spokesman confirmed she had been battling cancer, though the family chose to keep further medical details private, staying true to the same instinct for privacy she had carried her entire life. She was 86 years old, and tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment world, celebrating a career that had spanned Broadway, film, and 2 of the most influential sitcoms in American television history. But it was what came after her death that revealed the fullest picture of who Bea Arthur really was. Buried in her will was a gift that almost nobody outside her closest circle saw coming. She left $300,000 to the Ali Forney Center in New York City, a nonprofit dedicated to helping homeless LGBTQ youth, many of whom had been forced out of their own homes by families who rejected them. It wasn't a random act of charity either. Bea had quietly supported the organization for years, even headlining a benefit performance in 2005 that helped raise more than $40,000 for their work, all while keeping her involvement largely out of the headlines and away from entertainment reporters. In a 2005 interview, she explained her reasoning simply, saying these kids were being dumped by their own families just for being gay or transgender, and that the organization was truly saving lives. Executive Director Carl Siciliano later said, "The gift arrived at a moment when the organization genuinely didn't know if it could keep its doors open through the recession, and that Bea's generosity helped make sure the center could survive long enough to build something permanent for the community it served." Years later, that gift became the foundation for the Bea Arthur residence, an 18-bed home in Manhattan's East Village, built specifically to give LGBTQ youth a safe place to land. The building had sat vacant and city-owned for roughly 2 decades before the Ali Forney Center took it over, and the renovation was funded through the New York City Council and the Manhattan Borough President's Office, finally opening its doors in 2017. Nearly 8 years after Bea had passed away. Studies cited by outlets covering the project found that up to 40% of homeless youth in America identify as LGBTQ. So the timing and scale of Bea's gift mattered enormously to a population that had almost nowhere else safe to turn. It's one thing to publicly champion a cause while the cameras are rolling. It's another thing entirely to quietly fund a physical building without ever standing at a podium to take credit for it. Think about that for a second. Here was a woman who spent her entire public life being celebrated for her bluntness, her comebacks, her refusal to hold back. And yet, one of the most meaningful things she ever did was something she planned in near total silence, only for the world to discover it after she could no longer explain it herself. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't announce it on a talk show. She didn't even mention it in the many interviews she gave near the end of her career. She simply made sure it would happen and let the work speak for itself once she was gone from the world she had spent decades entertaining. It's a strange kind of double life when you really sit with it. A decorated Marine who spent decades denying her own service. A woman whose famous surname came from a marriage she almost never mentioned. One that lasted barely 3 years yet outlived every headline written about her since. A performer beloved for her openness, who quietly carried grief and insecurity that most of the public never once glimpsed behind the one-liners. And finally, a philanthropist whose biggest act of generosity only became public knowledge after she had already passed away, revealed not through an interview, but through the pages of a will. Bea Arthur spent her whole career teaching audiences that the loudest, funniest woman in the room can still be holding onto pieces of herself nobody else gets to see. She let the world laugh with Maude and Dorothy for decades, while an entirely different set of chapters sat quietly in the background, waiting for records, biographers, and a final will to bring them into the light. And in the end, that might be the most honest performance she ever gave. Proof that even someone who built a career on saying exactly what she thought could still keep the truths that mattered most entirely to herself. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.